The most dangerous person in the room isn't always the loudest. Sometimes, it's the person who finally stopped caring. The person who used to explain everything, forgive everything, and give everyone another chance. Until one day, they simply stop. No anger, no revenge, no warning. Just silence. And here's the question. What happens when a deeply empathetic person finally realizes that their kindness has been making other people powerful over them? By the end of this video, you'll understand why highly empathetic people can become extremely difficult to manipulate once they establish boundaries. Why constantly caring about everyone's emotions can become a hidden weakness. Why some people become uncomfortable when your attention suddenly disappears. And why Machiavelli's observations about human nature offer a surprisingly useful way to understand what happens when kindness stops being unlimited. But there's one transformation almost nobody sees coming. When an empath stops chasing approval, they don't necessarily become cruel. They become difficult to control. Imagine someone who has spent years being there for everyone. When a friend is struggling, they answer the phone. When someone needs advice, they listen. When someone makes a mistake, they forgive. When someone hurts them, they make excuses. Maybe they tell themselves they didn't mean it. They're going through something. Everyone deserves another chance. So they keep giving and giving and giving until one day, something inside them changes, not because they suddenly hate people, but because they finally become exhausted from carrying emotions that were never theirs to carry. The phone rings. They don't answer. Someone demands an explanation. They don't argue. Someone tries to pull them back into the same emotional cycle. This time, they simply say no. And strangely, that's when people start noticing their value. Few people realize that excessive availability can create an unhealthy psychological pattern. When someone is always available, always forgiving, always understanding, other people can begin treating that behavior as normal. Not necessarily because they're evil. Sometimes human beings simply adapt to what they repeatedly receive. If you always solve someone's problems, they may stop learning how to solve their own. If you always forgive without consequences, the other person may stop taking your boundaries seriously. If you constantly absorb someone's anger, they may begin treating you like an emotional dumping ground. And this is where empathy can become complicated. Empathy is valuable. It allows people to understand emotions, cooperate, comfort others, and build meaningful relationships. But empathy without boundaries can become self-neglect. You begin understanding everyone except yourself. You understand why they lied, why they shouted, why they disappeared, why they betrayed you, why they treated you badly. And because you can explain their behavior, you start believing you must tolerate it. But here's the strange part. Understanding someone's pain doesn't mean you're required to become its victim. And this distinction is where powerful psychological change begins. Human beings are social creatures. We evolved in groups where cooperation mattered. Belonging to a community could provide protection, resources, and support. So the human brain became highly sensitive to social rejection. We naturally want approval. We want to be accepted. We want to know that the people around us still value us. That's why saying no can feel uncomfortable. That's why setting boundaries can create guilt. And that's why some empathetic people continue giving long after they should have stopped. They aren't necessarily weak. Their brains may simply be prioritizing harmony over confrontation. But there is another side to this. When someone repeatedly sacrifices their own needs to maintain peace, resentment can eventually build underneath the surface. They smile while feeling exhausted. They say everything is fine while internally becoming disconnected. And eventually, the emotional system reaches a limit. This is sometimes what people describe as emotional detachment. But emotional detachment doesn't always mean becoming cold. It can mean finally learning that you are not responsible for managing every emotion around you. And this is where the philosophy of power becomes relevant. Machiavelli repeatedly examined how people behave when interests, fear, loyalty, and power collide. His broader lesson wasn't simply that everyone is evil. It was that appearances can change when incentives change. And once you understand that, you stop measuring relationships only by what people say. You start watching what happens when you establish a boundary, because that's when character becomes visible. Imagine a person who has always been easy to reach. Everyone knows they will answer. Everyone knows they'll forgive. Everyone knows they'll help. Now, imagine that person suddenly becomes selective. They stop explaining themselves. They stop chasing people who ignore them. They stop begging for recognition. They stop reacting to every provocation. Nothing dramatic happens, but the balance of the relationship changes. And this is where Machiavellian thinking becomes interesting. Power isn't always about forcing people to obey you. Sometimes power comes from not being dependent on their approval. A person who desperately needs everyone to like them can be easily influenced by rejection. But someone who can tolerate being misunderstood becomes much harder to control. That doesn't mean becoming heartless. It means becoming internally independent. And history repeatedly demonstrates a similar principle. The person who cannot tolerate losing approval can be controlled through approval. The person who cannot tolerate rejection can be controlled through rejection. The person who fears being alone can be controlled through isolation. But here's where it gets darker. What happens when someone realizes that their emotional generosity has become predictable? And what happens when the people who benefited from their kindness suddenly discover that the supply has disappeared? That's when the reaction begins. But here's what nobody tells you. The moment you stop giving people unlimited access to your attention, some of them won't miss you. They'll miss what you used to provide. Your attention, your forgiveness, your emotional support, your availability. And knowing the difference between those two things can completely change how you understand relationships. So what does a powerful empath actually do? They don't suddenly become cruel. They don't manipulate people. They don't seek revenge. Instead, they change the rules of access. First, they stop over-explaining. You don't always need a 5-minute explanation for every boundary. No can be a complete sentence. I can't do that can be enough. I need some space doesn't require a courtroom defense. The more you constantly justify your boundaries, the more opportunities you give someone to negotiate them. Second, they stop confusing guilt with responsibility. Feeling guilty doesn't automatically mean you've done something wrong. Sometimes guilt appears simply because you're doing something unfamiliar. If you've spent years pleasing everyone, the first time you disappoint someone may feel terrible. But discomfort isn't always evidence of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's evidence of growth. Third, they watch reactions to boundaries. This is one of the most revealing tests of any relationship. Tell a respectful person, I can't help you today. They may accept it. They might be disappointed, but they respect your decision. Now tell someone who is accustomed to controlling your attention. They may become angry. They may guilt-trip you. They may accuse you of changing. They may suddenly question your loyalty. And that's where psychology becomes dangerous. because their reaction may reveal something their words never did. They weren't necessarily attached to your well-being. They may have been attached to your availability. Fourth, they stop chasing people. If someone repeatedly ignores you, you don't need to keep proving your value. If someone consistently disrespects you, you don't need to win an argument. If someone keeps walking away, you don't always have to run after them. Sometimes the most powerful response is simply allowing people to reveal what they truly want. Time is an incredible psychological filter. It exposes consistency. It exposes priorities. It exposes character. And most importantly, it exposes whether someone values you or simply values what you do for them. But everything changes when an empath learns one final lesson. You can understand someone completely and still decide they don't belong in your life. That's not hatred. That's not revenge. And that's not weakness. It's a boundary. But there is a deeper psychological reason why some people become uncomfortable when an empathetic person stops caring. And it has less to do with love than you might think. But this is where almost everyone misunderstands what is happening. When an empath stops caring, people often assume they have become cold. But what if they haven't become cold at all? What if they've simply stopped allowing other people to control their emotions? Because the moment you stop reacting, you remove something extremely valuable from a manipulative relationship, your predictability. And once people can no longer predict your emotional reactions, the entire dynamic can change. Think about the person who always responds immediately. You send a message, they answer. You create a problem, they help. You become angry. They apologize. You disappear. They chase you. Over time, a pattern develops. The other person learns exactly how to get your attention. They know what makes you feel guilty. They know what makes you anxious. They know what makes you explain yourself. And sometimes, without even realizing it, you've taught them how to control the relationship. But here's the strange part. Control doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like friendship. Sometimes it looks like love. Sometimes it even looks like concern. A person might say, "I just need you. If you really cared, you would help me. You've changed. You're not the person you used to be." And those sentences can create enormous emotional pressure because an empath naturally wants to reduce suffering. They don't want to hurt people. They don't want conflict. They don't want someone thinking badly of them, so they give in, again and again and again, until their kindness becomes predictable. The psychology of emotional availability. Human attention is valuable. We notice what is difficult to obtain. We pay attention to uncertainty. We become more curious when something is no longer guaranteed. This doesn't mean you should deliberately manipulate people by becoming unavailable. That's not the lesson. The lesson is much simpler. Your attention should be a choice, not an obligation. When you give everyone unlimited access to your emotions, you eventually have very little energy left for yourself. And this is where many empathetic people make their biggest mistake. They think, if I don't help, I'm selfish. If I walk away, I'm cruel. If I stop responding, I'm a bad person. But boundaries don't erase empathy. They protect it, because someone who is emotionally exhausted cannot continue giving genuine compassion forever. Eventually, compassion becomes resentment, and resentment becomes withdrawal. That's why learning to say no can actually preserve your ability to care. The Machiavellian perspective, Machiavelli's world, was built around uncertainty. Political alliances could change, friends could become rivals, power could shift, and loyalty could be tested by circumstances. His observations encourage a person to look beyond appearances and examine incentives behavior, and consequences. Apply that idea to everyday relationships. Don't only ask, "Does this person say they care about me?" Ask, "How do they behave when I disagree with them? How do they react when you say no? How do they behave when you succeed? What happens when you stop giving them constant attention? What happens when you become less emotionally available?" These moments can reveal more than hundreds of conversations, because people often reveal their real expectations when those expectations are denied. The boundary test: imagine you've always been the person everyone calls when they need help. One day, you say, "I'm sorry, I can't do this today." A healthy person might respond, "No problem, take care of yourself." But someone who has become dependent on your availability might react very differently. They may become offended. They might accuse you of being selfish. They might remind you of every favor they've ever done for you. They might suddenly question the entire relationship. And here's the important distinction. Your boundary didn't create their reaction. Your boundary revealed it. That's a powerful difference. Because sometimes people aren't angry because you've done something wrong. They're angry because you're no longer doing what they expected. When the empath stops explaining, one of the biggest transformations happens when an empathetic person stops explaining every decision. They no longer feel obligated to convince everyone. They don't need everyone to understand. They don't need everyone to agree. They simply know what they will and won't tolerate. This creates something psychologists often associate with healthy emotional regulation, internal control. Instead of allowing another person's mood to determine your mood, you maintain your own emotional center. Someone is angry. You don't automatically become angry. Someone is disappointed. You don't automatically feel guilty. Someone misunderstands you. You don't immediately panic and start defending yourself. You pause, you observe, you choose. And that pause is power. But there's a deeper layer. Here's where the transformation becomes truly interesting. When an empath stops caring about everyone's approval, they often discover that they were never afraid of losing people. They were afraid of losing belonging, and those are two very different things. Losing a specific person can hurt, but believing that you need everyone to accept you can become a prison once that fear disappears. Your decisions become different. You stop chasing. You stop begging. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to rescue every relationship. And suddenly, people have to meet you where you are. Not because you're manipulating them, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself to keep them comfortable. But here's the part. Most people get completely wrong. The goal of becoming powerful was never to make other people regret losing you. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making someone jealous. It wasn't about becoming emotionally unavailable so people would chase you. The real transformation is much deeper. You stop asking, "How can I make them value me?" And you finally start asking, "Why did I ever need them to?" That's where the real power begins. Here is the truth most people never expect. The most powerful version of an empath isn't someone who stops caring about people. It's someone who stops abandoning themselves just to keep other people happy. That distinction changes everything, because if you stop caring, simply because you've been hurt, you may become bitter. But if you stop seeking everyone's approval because you've finally understood your own value, you become free. The goal was never to become cold. The goal was to become selective. Selective with your attention. Selective with your energy. Selective with your trust. And selective with the people who get access to your inner world. For years, an empath may ask, "Are they okay? Did I hurt them? What are they thinking about me? Should I apologize? Should I give them another chance? But eventually, a different question appears. Am I okay? That question may sound simple, but psychologically, it represents an enormous shift. Your attention moves from external validation to internal stability. Instead of constantly monitoring other people's emotions, you begin monitoring your own. You notice when you're exhausted. You notice when you're being disrespected. You notice when a relationship feels one-sided, and you stop automatically explaining those feelings away. Few people realize how powerful that can become. Because once you understand your own emotional boundaries, other people's emotional reactions become less capable of controlling you. This is where Machiavelli's ideas can be viewed from a different perspective. Power isn't always domination. Sometimes power is the ability to remain steady when someone else is trying to provoke you. Someone insults you. You don't immediately react. Someone attempts to guilt you. You don't immediately surrender. Someone walks away. You don't automatically chase. Someone misunderstands you. You don't spend hours trying to prove your innocence. This doesn't mean you never communicate. It means you choose when communication is actually useful. There is a difference between emotional suppression and emotional control. Suppression says, I must not feel this. Control says, I feel this, but I choose what I do with it. That difference is enormous, and it is one of the clearest signs of emotional maturity. Rule 1. Stop chasing. The first rule is simple. Stop measuring your value through other people's reactions. If someone likes you, that doesn't automatically make you valuable. If someone dislikes you, that doesn't automatically make you worthless. If someone misunderstands you, that doesn't automatically mean you failed. Your identity cannot depend on a constantly changing audience. Because the moment your self-worth depends on other people's approval, they gain influence over your emotional state. And this is exactly what a psychologically strong person learns to avoid. You can listen to criticism without becoming criticism. You can accept rejection without becoming rejected. You can experience failure without deciding that you are a failure. Your identity belongs to you. Rule 2. Let people reveal themselves. Second rule. Don't force people to show you who they are. Give situations time. People reveal themselves through patterns. Watch how they treat someone who cannot benefit them. Watch how they behave when they are told no. Watch whether they celebrate someone else's success. Watch whether their kindness disappears when they stop getting attention. You don't need to interrogate everyone. You don't need to investigate every friendship. You simply need to observe, because behavior repeated over time becomes evidence. And evidence is far more valuable than promises. The third rule may be the hardest. You can leave without becoming bitter. Not every relationship needs an enemy. Not every ending needs revenge. Not every betrayal requires retaliation. Sometimes the strongest response is simply distance. You don't need to destroy someone who hurt you. You don't need to make them jealous. You don't need to prove that they lost something valuable. You simply continue your life, because if your peace depends on someone else's regret, they still have power over you. True emotional freedom begins when their reaction no longer determines your direction. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson hidden inside this entire idea. An empath doesn't become powerful by learning how to stop feeling. They become powerful by learning how to feel without being controlled by what they feel. They can care without carrying everyone. They can love without losing themselves. They can forgive without reopening the same door. They can understand someone without accepting their behavior. And they can walk away. Without hatred, that is not weakness, that is emotional discipline. So remember these three things. Protect your attention, protect your boundaries, and protect your identity. Because the moment you stop needing everyone to understand you, you become harder to manipulate. The moment you stop chasing everyone who walks away, you become emotionally independent. And the moment you realize that your kindness is a choice, not a debt, you become free. Maybe the most powerful person isn't the one who controls everyone else. Maybe it's the person who finally learns to control themselves. If this video made you see empathy, boundaries, and human behavior differently, subscribe to Mindlytic for more deep explorations into psychology, philosophy, power, and human nature. And remember,